Between 2015 and 2020, the European Union exported more than 81,000 tons of pesticides to Africa. Pesticides so dangerous, they are banned for use in Europe itself. And yet, these very same chemicals were shipped straight into African markets. Here, they were sprayed on our soils, handled by farmers without protection, and left to contaminate on our rivers and our food. Now, if Europe calls them poison at home, why do they call them development in Africa? By the end of today's conversation, I will definitely walk you through a story that is as painful as it is eye-opening. We will go back in time to see how pesticides and fertilizers first arrived in Africa, not as tools for food security, but as weapons of profit for colonial plantations. We will also uncover how, decades later, the so-called Green Revolution promised to end hunger, but instead trapped African farmers in cycles of debt and dependency. We will also expose the role of powerful players such as Bill Gates, AGRA, and multinational corporations like Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, and Yara, and also how they have reshaped Africa's food system in their own image. We will also confront the hypocrisy of Europe, banning dangerous chemicals at home while flooding African markets with the very same poisons. And finally, we will look at the resistance, the African farmers and movements who are fighting back, reclaiming sovereignty and proving that another path is definitely possible. Now, to understand how Africa became dependent on pesticides and fertilizers today, we must first go back to the age of empire or colonization, where our lands were not seen as homes, but as plantations for foreign profit. When European colonial powers carved up Africa in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they did not come looking to feed Africans. Guys, this was never about us. Please, let's take note of that. They came to extract. They came here to grow coffee in Kenya, cocoa in Ghana, tea in Tanzania, cotton in Sudan, sugarcane in Mozambique, etc., etc. These were not crops planted for the local people. These were grown for European markets. Now, by 1940s and 50s, colonial officers were so obsessed with one question: how do we squeeze more out of this soil? And the answer came in form of chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides, which were imported from Europe and the United States. Now, picture this. You have a cocoa plantation in Gold Coast, right? That is what we call Ghana today. The land is stripped bare, cleared for rows upon rows of cocoa trees. Local farmers, once planting millets, yams, or cassava for their families, are now forced into wage labor. They are forced to spray imported pesticides to protect a crop they may never even get to taste. Come to Kenya, in the Rift Valley, tea and coffee estates are blooming, they are green, but only because sacks of European fertilizer are poured into the soil, season after season after season, to keep the monocultures alive. Now, these chemicals were never about food security. They were about profit security. Every bag of fertilizer, every drum of pesticide shipped into Africa meant bigger harvests for Europe's industries: chocolates, textiles, sugar, tea, etc., etc. For Africans, this meant dependency. A system was being born where the soil could not breathe without imported inputs, and where African farmers were positioned not as sovereign food producers, but as laborers in someone else's supply chain. Now, colonial governments built research stations to test how fertilizers could make cotton whiter or how pesticides could protect tobacco leaves, but they rarely invested in crops that fed African households. We are talking about the ones we had last time here on the table: the sorghums, the millets, all these things, the backbone of African diets. They obviously dismissed this as primitive, and instead colonial policies pushed export crops that drained the soil and eroded food security. And here's the cruel irony? Well, these plantations exported profits across oceans. Millions of Africans faced hunger and malnutrition at home. The very chemicals that were meant to feed the world were never meant to feed Africa. They were meant to keep plantations profitable. And this is the foundation on which everything else stands today. When we look at the fertilizers and pesticides, we are not just looking at modern products. We are looking at the legacy of a colonial system that saw African soil as a factory floor and African farmers as replaceable workers in a global machine. As the flags of independence were raised across Africa in the 60s, the 1960s, a new promise arrived. Now, for the first time in decades, African nations had the power to chart their own path. I mean, we've been colonized, but here we have independence. Can we go back now to our crops? Can we now go back to treating our soil the way we want it to be? Leaders stood before their people, declaring the dawn of freedom, of self-rule, of dignity restored. But freedom also came with a very heavy burden. Some of these leaders, they looked at this crowd and they were wondering, how do we continue feeding this population? How do we continue rebuilding this economy? And also prove that Africa can stand tall in a world that doubted it. And just as those questions were being asked, another offer landed on Africa's table. It came not from colonizers this time, but from Western foundations and donors. They called it the Green Revolution. Now, the pitch for this Green Revolution was very simple, but very seductive also. You have modern seeds, chemical, the fertilizers, pesticides, and they are telling you these things have transformed farming in Asia and Latin America. And now they go on and tell you, if Africa, you adapt the same package, hunger would end, you will have great harvests and prosperity will follow. Now, for leaders who are new into this global politics, this sounds like a miracle. I mean, who wouldn't want to be the president or prime minister who is delivering food security to their people? Who wouldn't want to show that independence means progress? And so, one by one, governments signed on this thing that is called Green Revolution. And this is what many did not see. The Green Revolution was never a neutral gift. It was a carefully packaged system, one designed to make African farmers dependent. Now, picture a smallhold farmer in Tanzania. For generations, her family had planted sorghum and millet, saving seeds from each harvest, rotating crops, enriching the soil with manure. All these things our ancestors did. Now, you come and tell this woman that, these seeds and whatever you are doing here, it's very outdated, that real progress means buying hybrid maize seeds, But these new seeds are also coming with certain conditions. They need fertilizer to grow properly. They need pesticides to survive pests. And unlike her old seeds, she cannot save them for next year. She must buy them again and again and again. You get where we are going? Now, this looked like progress, of course, but in truth, this was a trap. Farming shifted from a cycle of self-sufficiency to a cycle of purchasing. Every season became a transaction. Every harvest a bill. Guys, I'm tired of seeing how Africa we were set up from the word go. You remember just the other day when we were talking about formulas and the fact that they would give these formulas to new mothers and then they would have their breast milk dry and then you will have to go and buy this formula over and over again. The same thing is happening now to our farmers. They tell you these are hybrid seeds, take them. But these seeds need fertilizers and these seeds need pesticides and you cannot replant these seeds. What sort of dependency is this? And then now behind the scenes, you have corporations like Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, and Yara. They are waiting eagerly because the Green Revolution opened doors for their product to flood into African markets. Fertilizer sales soared, pesticide imports grew, hybrid seeds began to replace indigenous varieties that had sustained communities for centuries. Because if you're coming and you're telling me, these are the hybrid seed, the fertilizers and the pesticides, please tell me this is also being manufactured in Africa, but it's not. It's not being manufactured in Africa. It's not an African product. It is a Monsanto, it is a Bayer, it is a Syngenta, and it's also AGRA product. So here comes us now starting to import these things again. But we had solutions for these things, right? And as Africa, we are embracing this so-called revolution. Something precious is beginning to get lost. Sovereignty. Farmers who once controlled their own seed and soil were now locked into a system designed thousands of miles away in the boardrooms of Europe and America. Yes, some yields rose in the short term. Yes, some harvests looked bigger and greener, but the cost was very much hidden. Our soil was growing weak, biodiversity disappeared, and farmers sliding into debt left, right, and center. Independence had promised us freedom. I mean, our founding fathers stood in front of their people and they said, freedom is coming, and freedom has come, and freedom is now. But the Green Revolution is here now delivering a new kind of dependency. One with smiling donors instead of colonial officers and corporate logos instead of empire flags. Colonization continues in Africa until today. These people don't have to kill the Mau Maus. They don't have to go after our ancestors. They are going after us through this thing that is called food, right? So now when you go back, by the early 2000s, Africa had lived through decades of Green Revolution experiment. The results were mixed at best. As we said, higher yields in some area, but deeper poverty and soil exhaustion in others. Still, the same promise was repackaged and sold again. Only this time, it came with bigger money, bigger names, and bigger corporations. Let's take a look. In 2006, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, together with Rockefeller Foundation, launched AGRA. AGRA is the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Gates Foundation promised billions of dollars to transform African farming. I mean, this guy's mission statement sounded very, noble. Double the yields or the harvest, double the income, and end hunger for 30 million smallholder households by 2020. I mean, who wouldn't want that? I mean, who wouldn't want to end hunger in Africa? Who wouldn't? Even me, I would have loved that. Definitely would. But look closer at the model and you will see it was built on the same foundations as the old Green Revolution. Only this time with more tilted, it was more tilted toward corporate interests. AGRA did not just provide seeds or fertilizers, it reshaped policies. Governments across Africa were lobbied to change their laws, align with international seed treaties like UPOV of the 1991, and enforce strict certification standards. So what did this mean on the ground? It meant a farmer in Ghana or Kenya who saved seeds from last year's harvest could suddenly be considered a criminal if those seeds were not certified. Now we need seeds to be certified. So who was certifying these seeds for our ancestors? This means traditional seed sharing, a practice that built community and resilience for centuries, was now illegal. And once the laws were in place, the corporations moved in. Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, AGRA, they did not need to fight for markets anymore. The laws and subsidies delivered the market to them straight on. Monsanto, which is now Bayer, pushed patented maize and cotton seeds that forced farmers to buy afresh every season. Guys, we are talking about patented seeds in Africa, not by us, but by some random corporation we don't even know. And then now you have this same Bayer dominating pesticide sales. And many of these pesticides that they are selling here in Africa are banned in Europe. We had a whole episode with Kubai on these things and how Africa continues using pesticides that have been banned in Europe. But let's go on with these corporations. Syngenta, owned by China's ChemChina, flooded African markets with paraquat-based herbicides, so deadly that a single sip can kill you. AGRA International, the Norwegian fertilizer giant, became the main supplier of fertilizer across East and West Africa. And thanks to this AGRA again, this AGRA-inspired subsidy programs, African governments were spending billions in public funds each year, not on schools, not on hospitals, not on tech, but on fertilizer imports. Take Kenya, our beautiful country, for example. In 2022, the government spent over $400 million on fertilizer subsidies. But who benefited? Often not the smallholder farmer who feeds this nation, but the importers, the brokers, the middlemen, and ultimately this corporation AGRA. Put yourself in this scenario. Where are you benefiting? Because even these subsidies, the fertilizers, some of our parents still ask, where is this fertilizer that we were promised by the government? Where is it? And then you go to Ghana. Despite years of AGRA investments, hunger did not fall. It rose by 30%. Farmers growing maize with expensive inputs found themselves deeper in debt, unable to pay back loans, when the harvests fell short. And then you take a look at Zambia. AGRA encouraged maize monocultures, backed by fertilizer subsidies. Farmers are there now abandoning millet and sorghum crops that could survive droughts. And then they are being told, just plant maize, just plant maize alone. And then when climate shocks hit, maize fails and families go hungry. And then by 2020, the verdict was clear. Independent studies in 2020 found no evidence that AGRA had doubled yields or incomes. Instead, hunger had increased in AGRA's focus countries, leaving over 130 million people undernourished, up from 100 million when AGRA began. I thought AGRA was supposed to help us end hunger. But now even in some of their key countries, Zambia, Kenya, Ghana, look at the results. But again, while farmers struggled, the corporations thrived. And this was very brilliant of them. We have to give them that. This was very brilliant of this system. We will come and tell you this will work. As long as you guys keep buying fertilizer and pesticides from us, we don't give a hoot. You just buy what you need to buy, spoil your soil, exhaust your soil, do what you need to do with your soil, move into planting one crop only. You wonder what happened. You go to farms, African farms, and they've just planted maize. And that's when we were growing up. I would see actually my grandma, she would have maize, beans, cassava, all these things, ngwashe, in the same place, terere. But then here they are coming and then they are taking you back to colonialism. And they are telling you just plant maize. Even you should have thought, I'm planting maize in my small shamba. Where will the vegetables come in from? And then now take a look at this guy, Gates. He provided the money and legitimacy. I mean, if Bill Gates says something, guys, he knows what he's talking about, right? He knows what he's talking about. So he provides the money and legitimacy. AGRA goes ahead and writes the policies. Then the government subsidizes the inputs, and then corporations are supplying the products. Please show me where Africa is benefiting here. Show me where Africa is benefiting. We don't even have fertilizer companies. How are we benefiting? And now the African farmer, these farmers become permanent customers in a global supply chain that they never asked to join. Every planting season, you have to go back to the shop. Every harvest, more money left the village and flowed into corporate headquarters in Europe, North America, or China. Now, when you go back and take a look at this, what was sold as empowerment became dependency. What was called progress was in truth a transfer of power from African farmers to multinational corporations. And as if dependency on seeds and fertilizers was not enough, another betrayal was quietly unfolding, and this time it came dressed in the robes of hypocrisy. Europe is very famous for its strict food safety laws. In Brussels, entire committees debate which chemicals are safe for human beings and which ones are too dangerous. Pesticides like atrazine linked to infertility were here. You have others. This name is even so hard for me to pronounce. It's on your screen. They are known to damage children's brain. And then you have carbofuran, so toxic that a few drops can kill birds or mammals. And then the most famous one, paraquat, a herbicide so lethal that one accidental sip can end your life. These are chemicals Europe decided were too dangerous for its own citizens. They were banned, taken off shelves, strictly outlawed to protect Europeans. But here comes the hypocrisy. Those same chemicals never stopped being produced in European factories. They were simply put on ships and exported to Africa. Tell me how that works. Maybe it's time for Africa also to produce a poisonous product, like poisonous coffee or tea, you know, and actually export it to this country. Have our governments protect us from consuming it, but also be open in a way we can actually manufacture this in Kenya, but our own people can't consume it, but now let us send this to Europe. Hey! Why? Why? If you love Africans so much, why are you letting poison be manufactured in your own place and then you bring it here? Why? So between 2015 and 2020 alone, the European Union exported more than 81,000 tons of pesticides banned for use within Europe. 81,000 tons of poison that Europeans said no to. But Africans were told, take this, this is development. This makes me so mad. So mad. And where do you think these products are going? South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. Some of Africa's largest agricultural economies. And here's the cruel irony. These pesticides are not just used on crops for local markets. They are used on export crops too. Cocoa in Ghana, coffee in Ethiopia, tea in Kenya, which means that Europe not only exports its poisons, but then imports the products grown with them. Guy, look at this irony. Look at these people. Europeans will get their safe chocolate, their fine coffee, their tea, while African farmers will have to live with the exposure, the water contamination, and the health risks, not even talking about the soil damage. Because as we want the product, so the foundation, you go make it toxic in Africa, actually poison everything in Africa and give us the product. The UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics has called this a racist double standard. By the way, UN also needs to stop talking. So if you called it a racist double standard, what have you done to prevent those products from entering Africa? We all know Europe would never allow its own citizens to be exposed to these levels of danger. Yet somehow, when it's Africa, it's acceptable. And all the UN will say is this is a racist double standard. But what did you do after calling it that? You know, what makes this worse is the lack of protection on the ground. I know you've seen in our villages, farmers often spray these pesticides barefoot with no gloves, no masks, or no training whatsoever. And sometimes chemicals are stored in the same huts as food. Children play in fields recently sprayed with toxins considered too dangerous for Europeans. this is not an accident. This is a business model, a very successful business model. European companies are making billions exporting chemicals banned at home. African governments are lured by the idea of modernization and they go on and import these things. And farmers, the very people who feed the continent, pay the highest price with their health, their soils, their water, and their lives. Europe will go on and try and say this is trade. No, Africans are living in it. This is toxic colonialism. Let's call it what it is. Then when we think of Bill Gates, you think of technology, Microsoft, philanthropy, a man who built an empire of software, then turned to giving away his fortune to solve the world's toughest problems. And in Africa, one of the biggest problems, he set his eyes on was hunger. And this sounds noble, this sounds very urgent. But when you peel back the layers, you see the same patterns we've already traced from colonialism and Europe's poison exports. Only this time, the face wasn't a colonial officer or a European pesticide lobbyist. The face now is a philanthropist in a suit. But we can see AGRA is failing. But AGRA is still here. And Gates continues defending his vision, dismissing critics as anti-science, insisting that Africa needs the same modern tools that has fed other regions. But he has critics because over 200 organizations across Africa and the world are seeing it differently. They are calling it neocolonial philanthropy. They argue that Gates was not ending hunger. He's actually entrenching dependency. They are accusing him of building bridges, not for farmers, but for corporations. Bridges that continue to allow Monsanto, Syngenta, and AGRA to expand deeper into African soil. And the tragedy is not just in the failure of AGRA's promises, it is in the opportunity cost. Billions that could have been invested in irrigation, storage, agroecology, and indigenous knowledge were instead funneled into the same inputs that had already failed Africa once before. So when we ask, what is Bill Gates' role in Africa's food systems? The answer is not simple. He is not a villain in the old colonial sense, but in the eyes of his critics, he represents a new kind of power, a power that wears the mask of philanthropy but operates with the hand of a market maker, a man who wanted to fight hunger but instead may have helped create a future where African farmers are customers, not custodians of their land. Behind every bag of fertilizer and every packet of seeds, there are names that most African farmers may never see, but whose decisions shape their survival. These are not just companies, they are empires, and their grip on Africa's food system is tighter than most of us realize. I mean, take a look at Monsanto. For decades, Monsanto was the world's most notorious seed company. Its strategy was very simple but devastating. Replace traditional seeds with patented hybrids and genetically modified varieties. We are going to have a whole conversation on GMO, guys. In South Africa, Monsanto introduced GMO maize in the late 1990s. Today, over 80% of South Africa's maize is genetically modified, controlled through licensing agreements. Farmers cannot save these seeds. They must buy new ones every season, right? Monsanto also went ahead and popularized glyphosate herbicides like Roundup, a chemical so controversial it has triggered thousands of lawsuits worldwide for links to cancer. Yet in Africa, it became part of the package. Buy Monsanto seeds and you also buy Monsanto's chemicals. When Bayer, the German pharmaceutical giant, acquired Monsanto in 2018, it inherited both the products and the controversies. Today, Bayer Monsanto dominates Africa's maize and cotton markets, quietly embedding itself deeper into the continent's soil. Now, even beyond Monsanto, Bayer is a titan in its own right, known globally for its pharmaceuticals. It also sells pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides across Africa. But here is the paradox. Many of Bayer's top-selling pesticides in Africa are banned in Europe. the same company that abides by strict European Union rules at home, sells chemicals in Africa that Europeans consider unsafe. Bayer has mastered the art of branding itself as a partner in development, hosting farmer trainings and government partnerships. But behind the glossy brochures, critics see a clear pattern. Sell Africa what Europe will never accept, right? And then Syngenta, now owned by Chemchem China, is another giant with deep roots in Africa. Its flagship product here has been paraquat, one of the deadliest herbicides on earth. In Europe, paraquat is banned. In Africa, it is very much widely used. Farmers are spraying paraquat to clear weeds, often without gloves or masks. Cases of poisoning are very frequent, sometimes fatal, yet Syngenta frames its programs as training farmers, while continuing to profit from a chemical considered too dangerous for its own home markets. Syngenta also plays a big role in promoting hybrid seeds, tying African farmers into the same buy-every-season cycle that Monsanto pioneered. Then, Yara International, the fertilizer giant. If seeds and pesticides are one part of the trap, fertilizers are the other. And no company dominates this field like Yara International, based in Norway. Yara is the world's largest fertilizer company. And in Africa, it has positioned itself not just as a supplier, but as a policy shaper. Each year, Yara hosts the African Green Revolution Forum, one of the continent's most influential agriculture summits. It presents itself as a development partner, yet critics call this a lobbying platform dressed as philanthropy. Yara benefits massively from government subsidies. When Kenya spends $400 million on fertilizer support, or Nigeria distributes fertilizer vouchers, it is companies like Yara that supply those bags. Critics say this is not support for farmers. It is a direct transfer of public money into corporate pockets. And there is also a bitter irony here. Africa has vast phosphate reserves. Go to Morocco alone. Morocco holds about 70% of the world's supply. Did you know that? Yet instead of building local industries to process them, raw materials are exported, turned into finished fertilizers abroad, and then sold back to Africa at higher prices. Yara profits, Africa pays. Morocco, please, we are willing to buy fertilizer from you. Just do it here in Africa and we will come. Because what makes these corporations powerful is not just their products, but their collusion with philanthropy and policy. Monsanto and Bayer supply the seeds and pesticides. Syngenta floods the market with herbicides. Yara locks government into fertilizer imports. Gates and AGRA provide the funding, legitimacy, and lobbying. African governments are caught in the promise of modernization, pass laws and subsidies that guarantee markets. This is a perfect cycle for them. For farmers, it's dependency. For corporations, it's profit. And this is why many critics say Africa does not just import chemicals, it imports system of control. Systems where 4 or 5 corporations headquartered thousands of miles away decide what grows on African soil, what is sprayed into African water, and what ends up on African plates. Now, for every empire of power, there has always been resistance. And African farmers, the very people painted as helpless in this system, are not silent. They are rising. Across the continent, movements again, like Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, have emerged. These are not lobbyists in suits or corporations with billion-dollar budgets like Gates. These are farmers, healers, elders, and community organizers, people who are rooted in the soil. And their message is simple but very radical. Africa does not need a green revolution. Africa needs a food sovereignty revolution. They argue that true food security doesn't come from dependency on Monsanto's seeds or Yara fertilizers. it comes from agroecology, a way of farming that works with nature, not against nature. And what does this look like? Instead of pouring chemical fertilizers into tired soils, farmers are returning to compost manure and green manures that feed the land and keep it alive. Instead of monocultures that invite pests, you are now supposed to plant diverse fields, millet with beans, cassavas with groundnuts, a living insurance policy against climate shocks. Instead of you importing hybrid seeds every season, save and exchange those indigenous varieties that have been adapted to African conditions for centuries. Seeds that survive droughts, floods, and colonization. Seeds that carry both memory and resilience. And the result is going to be very powerful. Studies across Senegal, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Malawi show that farmers practicing agroecology often achieve equal or higher yields than chemical-intensive farming, but without the debt, without the poison, and with soils that grow healthier every other time. In Malawi, women cooperatives have revived indigenous crops once dismissed as backward or primitive. Today, those crops are feeding families and surviving droughts that wipe out maize. In Ethiopia, agroecology projects have restored degraded lands, bringing back biodiversity and reducing hunger. But perhaps the most important part of this resistance is not just the famine itself, it's the reclaiming of power. When farmers exchange seeds, please go and exchange those seeds. Go and exchange those seeds. When you exchange them, you are not just trading grain, you are defying a system that tried to criminalize your traditions. When communities choose compost over fertilizers, they are saying, we will not be a market for your poisons. Love in this spirit. And this resistance is growing louder across the continent. Civil society groups are calling out AGRA's failures, exposing Europe's double standards and challenging their governments to break free from corporate capture. Yes, the corporations are very powerful. They might even get this video deleted, you know. Yes, their money is very fast. But Africa is not just a victim in this story. It is also a fighter. And at the end of that fight are farmers, the women and men who know that sovereignty does not come from aid or philanthropy. Go away, Bill Gates. It comes from the soil, the seed, and the freedom to decide what to plant, how to grow it, and who it should feed. So, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. From the very beginning, Africa's soil was not treated as home, but as a factory floor or a foundation for colonial plantations. Fertilizers and pesticides were brought in not to feed African families, but to fatten European markets. Then after independence, the Green Revolution arrived with its promises of progress, and only to entangle farmers in cycles of debt and dependency. Decades later, the faces have changed, but the systems remain. Bill Gates, AGRA, multinational corporations, the Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, and Yara are promising to end hunger. Instead, they have tightened the grip. You know, don't allow people to tell you your seeds are illegal, that your soil will starve without foreign fertilizer, that your future depends on these subsidies and, you know, these corporations abroad. Please don't allow that. Because while this is happening, Europe continues to add insult to this injury. You ban dangerous pesticides at your own home and then you ship them here in tons. Thousands and thousands of tons, 81,000. Nah, don't allow that, Africa. Don't. We are not going to do that anymore. You know, Africa is not passive in this story. No. Let us continue resisting. Let us continue saving our seeds, and let us continue reviving indigenous crops and proving that agroecology can feed communities without poison, without debt, and without foreign control. We have to reclaim our sovereignty, one seed and one season at a time. And here is a question we must all wrestle with. If Africa holds 60% of world's uncultivated arable land, Why do we spend billions importing fertilizers every year? If Africa has centuries of farming wisdom, why do you allow yourself to be told that salvation lies in European chemicals? If hunger continues to rise, despite billions in aid, who is truly benefiting from this system? Because the truth is, this is not just a story about famine, it's a story about power, about who decides what grows in Africa, what dies, and who profits from Africa's soil. And until that power is reclaimed, until farmers, not corporations, decide Africa's food future, us as farmers, we decide our own food future, we must ask ourselves, is this really development? What Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, they are doing, and in the name of fertilizers, pesticides, and hybrid seeds in Africa, is it really development? Or is it simply colonialism by another name? You answer that for me on the comment section. And guys, I love that we are fighting back. I love on the comment section when people are saying they formed communities where they are exchanging indigenous seeds. Don't let people sell you fear. None of these companies are located in Africa, but millions and millions of dollars from farmers' pockets. This money is leaving Africa all the way to these companies. Sometimes I wonder, what do this continent actually produce? You go to Europe, you wonder, what are you known for? You see them developing and being called first world countries, and then you wonder who is actually financing their developments. It's you and I, the African farmers. It's the fact that Morocco cannot look back and say, oh, we have this much? How about we manufacture it here at home and sell it across Africa? Please, don't allow yourself to be carried stupid anymore. Don't allow yourself, I'm looking at our parents and our farmers, the way they are suffering because someone convinced them, just plant maize here alone. Please, don't intercrop. Don't. Just do maize alone. And then now when they are harvesting the maize, they are wondering, what are we going to eat this maize with? But every time you see those stores that are selling the fertilizers and herbicides, they continue, no, this is stupidity of the highest order. Take control of your seeds. If AGRA was supposed to change Africa, why is it now we have more, hunger cases? I thought you had the money. You had you had everything actually. You had the products to make us grow. But we are not growing. Africa, please do away with this stupidity. When did someone who deals with Microsoft and softwares and whatever become the mouthpiece of Africa's agriculture? Nope. No. The fact that even our own African governments allowed for these pesticides to come to Africa, 81,000 tons. Do you know how much that damage is to our soil? And these are just the figures we know about. They will say 81,000 tons because this is what we are supposed to know. And in Africa, when they tell you it's 81,000 tons, trust you, it's 200,000 tons of pesticides. Toxic pesticides that landed in this continent. And that is why our soil is so damaged. But it's not too late for us to go back. Do what you must. Feed your family, boycott these companies, boycott their products. Just, please, Africa, wake up, wake up. This is too much. The moment we all realize food is power, the day we realize our soil, our God-given soil, was supposed to help us as Africans when it comes to our food sovereignty. Please, why are we allowing people to come and tell us how to farm? Every time I do these conversations, one of the biggest questions I keep asking myself is, how did our ancestors do it? How? Just the other day, in one of our most watched episodes, I appreciate you guys for sharing that, majority of us are learning how important our foods were. Not this maize, ugali, michele. We had it all along. We had it all along. And it's such a shame that Kenya will spend $400 million for fertilizer subsidy, than I don't know. I don't even want to continue, guys. Today I'm mad. But share with me your thoughts on the comment section. Please, let's not be ignorant. Food is power. And there are so many corporations that are benefiting from our ignorance. Our inability to treat our soil. Our inability to go back to our manure. You know, when you had a cow or two, and you would collect the manure and then you would go and spread kidogo kidogo in the fields, and that worked even before the fertilizers. Now what is this? What is this? Using fertilizers and pesticides is not posh. It's not a flex. It's backward mentality. Let's go back to our traditions. Let's do what our ancestors did. They had it all figured out from the word go. He who controls your food controls you, if you know what I mean. But that's the end of my rant today. Please don't be shocked when you see this video deleted. They don't want you to know these things. But share it even before it's deleted. Share it with your neighbors, your uncles, your grandpa. Like this video so YouTube has no choice but to recommend it. Just like it. There's so much power in liking a video, you guys have no idea. But above all, I hope we continue learning and relearning each and every episode. And I love that these recommendations are coming from you guys. I see a lot of recommendations on us, handling the immunizations, the vaccines, etc., etc. We will get there. But I love that you're taking your time and you are participating in these conversations. We can sit here and we can have guests and we can have conversations on marriage, on spirituality, on this and this, finances. But until we open our mind, that is the easy way out. This is the work we need to do to grow. So let me know your honest thoughts on the comment section. I appreciate reading those comments. I try to answer to as many as I can. I love reading those comments. So share your thoughts on the comment section. Let's go back to basics. Those were beautiful days. Collecting manure were beautiful days. Those were beautiful days. Let's go back to basics. All right? So that's it from me today. Always a good time having you watch these episodes. As I said, I don't take it for granted. The team that gets to put this work together, I know I haven't said it in a minute. You get to see me here on this screen, but as always, if I was to pan this camera the other way, you would see the much force that comes together to put this work together. So I appreciate you guys. And thank you for getting us to 1.4 million subscribers. Let's end the year with 1.5 million subscribers, guys. Makes me really happy. You want to share something with me? You can't do it on the comment section. info@lnn.digital. Send me an email right there. And also, if you want to support our work, takes a lot to research, to produce, to edit, etc. We have an M-Pesa number right there on the screen. We also have a paybill number. We also have PayPal. And I see the people who are doing it on the super thanks category. I do not take you for granted. Thank you for supporting us even financially to continue bringing you shows that are going to unblock our mind. Some people may call this the rabbit hole, but please, let's enter. If this rabbit hole is what is going to save us and change our reasoning and our cocosity, let's do it. Are we together? So let's do it. Me, I'm out. Yeah. Hopefully it's EJ's turn. Let's see what he has to present for you. EJ, you are ready? Ready? All right. Good, guys. Bye.